It's stage 4 blackouts. At the moment, it's going to be in place till 4 p.m. this afternoon. From 4 p.m. though, we're back into stage 5. Now, the reason I mention that, of course, is we know how important copper cabling is, of course, to try and keep our lights on, and how much copper theft is an issue in our country. Well, here's some numbers. It's costing our country a whopping 46.5 billion rand every year with copper cable thefts. It affects, of course, your electricity supply when the cables are cut, and I'm afraid things are expected to get worse. Here's another worrying number. The Copper Development Association is predicting that demand for copper is going to soar from 25 to 60 million tons by the year 2050. It's not good news for those who are trying to keep our lights on. The association's Mr. Evert Swanepoel making time for me this morning. Mr. Swanepoel, good morning. I appreciate your time, sir. So if we are already struggling with crime and the theft of copper cable, I imagine it's going to get worse the higher the demand goes. Good morning.
Good morning, Gareth. Without a question, we think it's going to get worse. As the demand increases, and the demand will increase. I mean, alternative energy is one of electricity's saving graces, hopefully. Now, obviously, alternative energy uses a lot more copper than conventional fossil fuel power stations, and that demand is global. So, as you mentioned earlier on, that increase in copper is going to be extremely high.
So what could we be doing as a country, whether this is authorities, the SAPS, community members, Eskom? Of course, I have to bring the name Eskom in here, don't I, as well, to try and deal with this? Is there any discussions around how to try and stop the theft of copper? We need it, but we also are having it stolen. So where do we start, do you think?
We've been in discussion with government for the last 10 years, to be honest with you. And the latest thing on the table is the prohibition of the export of copper scrap. Now, copper scrap, the prohibition was started in January this year, and it was going to last for 6 months to see if it has any real effect in reducing copper cable theft. In our view, it hasn't. And the government has just put a proposal forward, which we are digesting at the moment, some further issues that we would like to introduce, which will surely, hopefully, reduce the theft of copper cable. So that is on the table. Our comments will be closing on the 29th, and then we'll see what government says after that.
Give us a sense, if you could, Mr. Swanepoel, as well, about our country and copper exports versus other countries, because I get a sense that we're one of those countries, correct me if I'm wrong, that we export quite a lot of our copper, so there's a market for it internationally as well, and I imagine this is where criminal syndicates get involved. Do a lot of other countries export as much as we do?
Gareth, no. I think that's our real problem. That we export virtually all our scrap. Now, that's possibly the biggest problem we have, and that obviously fuels the theft of copper cable. You must remember, copper cable is 99.9% pure copper. Now, that's the best metal you can use for electrical applications. Now, that is really, the other countries really don't allow this. Most countries will buy copper in because of the obvious shortage, but most countries will not allow the export of copper. Now, we're not in the same position. We feel there's a lot of our copper scrap or recycled copper that's created, which we cannot refine in this country. We just haven't got a refinery. So some of the copper scrap, yes, has to be exported, but we believe it should be controlled, and we believe that there are ways and means of reducing the existing high volume of copper that's leaving the country. But yes, other countries mostly don't allow the export of copper.
I want to end off our conversation, Mr. Swanepoel, with that, because I see a lot of talk. It's almost like the rhino horn trade, where there's this talk of if you flood the market with a lot of the product, in this case, that being copper, the price will come down, the demand will come down. Or would you go the way you're suggesting and to try and control this, or perhaps an outright ban of exporting copper? What do? Flood the market, take away the demand, or do you ban it all right? Just a last brief answer, if you could.
Gareth, we would not be able to flood the market. There's just not enough copper. As you mentioned at the beginning of our discussion, the tonnages that's going forward is going to escalate. So I think every country in the world is going to be clamoring for copper and copper scrap. So we won't be able to flood the market. I think we have to, unfortunately, bring in measures beyond just the export of copper and reduce it. In other words, maybe tax, higher tax, things like take away scrap cash. At the moment, a seller can walk into a scrap merchant and he will get his $50, whatever, for his kilogram of copper. That must be stopped. It must be done on EFT. Then there's a paper trail, and at least you can follow who's been handling the copper, and you can follow it up the chain to who the guilty parties are. Because the guy that's stealing the copper is just the messenger. He's just the poor guy that possibly gets electrocuted. But that goes up the line to the syndicates who then export. So I think the government has done a lot to introduce certain measures. We think there are one or two extra measures that should be or could be introduced. We've put that forward to government, and we'll wait to see what they come up with. If they accept it, we believe it's going to have a big impact on the reduction of copper scrap.
We appreciate your time this morning, Mr. Evert Swanepoel, Executive Chairperson of the Copper Development Association of Africa. It's going to be very tricky with this demand for copper on the increase, all to do with electric cars, never mind everything else that we use copper for. And we are a major exporter of our copper, so there is a huge market for it. But it's good to hear the thoughts of Evert Swanepoel this morning. I thank him for his time.